Recording.
Well, great to see you, everybody. This is going to be our last Vegan Leaders livecast of this year. And the topic for today is one that wraps it up nicely. Gail, can you please allow me to screen share? There should be an option for you to allow me to screen share. Here we go. Thank you. Okay. What we want to talk about is what is likely going to happen in the next 10 years, both for vegan leaders in corporate management, but also for the movement at large, because our success very much correlates with the success of the movement. In order for us to intelligently talk about what's likely going to happen in the next 10 years, we should look at it in the historical context, look at where we are now and how we got here. Where we are now as a vegan or plant-based movement is actually really interesting. If we think about what it looks like at the present time, it's really exciting. It seems that in recent history, the vegan movement has truly taken off and is now enjoying major momentum. Whereas those of you guys who have been vegan for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, probably still remember what it was like back in the day, where, first of all, if you went out with friends or colleagues to a restaurant, most likely you would be eating a plate made of side dishes, or most likely you would have to constantly battle the perception of veganism that would be it's the hippies, it's the angry anarchist activists. Those memories are still quite fresh, I think, in our heads. So then what about the future? It's kind of hard to say for sure what's going to happen in the next 10 years or in the future in general, but I think we can feel somewhat confident that because the momentum has been so strong, the momentum should continue very strongly. And in fact, we are probably on the cusp of a tipping point right now, and we should see a pretty explosive growth in the future. When I was preparing for this topic, I was learning a little bit about the history of our movement. There is not actually a ton of stuff on this topic online, but there is a very good article called A Brief History of Veganism written by Victoria Moran, which you can get on Mainstream Vegan, on the Mainstream Vegan website. And it's a really good short article where she talks about really the last 100+ years of the vegan movement. You know, the veganism and vegetarianism has existed throughout the history, particularly in India. But actually, it wasn't until 1815 where there was even a word created for vegetarianism. And then if we look at the 20th century, that's where things really started picking up and transforming in a society. If we think about the first generation of veganism, the period from the 40s, mid-40s to the 60s, the movement was still at a very, very early stage. Actually, the reason this first generation is even started by this year is that that's when the word vegan was even defined by the UK Vegetarian or Vegan Society. And during this period, really, this was just kind of a foundation where just the basic terminology, the basic infrastructure was even laid down. According to Victoria Moran's article, the second generation of veganism was that when that foundation grew a little bit. For example, there were a couple landmark books or events that took place in the 70s, which was for the first time where the vegan or vegetarian individuals came together for a summit. And the term animal rights was defined by Peter Singer as a result of Peter Singer's Animal Liberation book. So still just very, you know, the movement was still extremely fringe, really misunderstood and, you know, really underrepresented at this time. Then from the 80s to late 90s, couple things happened that really broke away the movement a little bit into society. It still would be perceived as very fringe, but people started talking about it. PETA, for example, was founded at this time. Several books were written which rose to the new level of popularity. And then, you know, kind of a huge thing that happened is, many of you probably are aware of this, is that, you know, Oprah had a guest speaker on her show who talked about the beef industry, and then Oprah famously exclaimed on the show, "I will never eat beef again," for which she got sued by the Cattlemen's Association. It was a very long and painful lawsuit where Oprah and her guest speaker ultimately prevailed, and this just, you know, turned something in a society. And then let's take a look at the last 10 years. This is where really things started happening on a huge scale. So let's call this the fourth generation of veganism. Very popular books started coming out one after another. Major documentaries broke into the mainstream. And ultimately what happened is the vegan food became a thing that people started to expect. The vegan movement started being featured in media in a new light, and it finally kind of became global and mainstream. So if this is the recent history, what really happened here? What caused this trajectory to grow so much? There are a couple things that happened, and these are some of the same things that benefited other, you know, movements or groups or communities. Probably the biggest thing that happened that made the vegan movement grow to the level where it's today is just the internet and social media, where all of these, you know, individuals were able to come together, be validated, be empowered, you know, start discussing strategy and push this content out. So probably of all the things that happened that were good for the movement, this one was probably the most significant one. The second one, and this is what really started happening in a big way in the last 10 years, was the vegan movement started having a lot of champions from unexpected sources. If you guys remember 10 or 15 years ago, whenever somebody would try to mention, you know, which celebrity or which, you know, famous public figure is vegan, it was always the same dozen people. But in the last 10 years, new and new unexpected people started coming out as vegans. A lot of athletes, this was kind of like a huge thing that happened. A lot of athletes who were already vegan, you know, started to be talked about in the media, politicians, additional public figures. And I do like to say that, you know, the Vegan Leaders in Corporate Management, our own organization, actually played a very significant role in this, because we said, well, why don't we focus on all the vegans in the corporate and Fortune 500 world? Why don't we create that additional social proof, focusing on ambassadors of the vegan and plant-based movement? The third thing that happened, which was also pretty huge for the movement, there's a little bit of debate still about it, is the vegan movement found a way to reinvent itself. What I mean by that is the term plant-based started to be used kind of in addition or instead of vegan. And that actually made quite a big difference, because there was just a subtle nuance to how the word plant-based comes across. And it was actually really powerful, and it led to the point where in, you know, last couple of years, truly the society and media started talking about veganism as that's the top consumer trend. 2019 was widely said to be a year of a vegan. So now let me actually dig into this one a little bit, because it could have implications on what is possible for us in the next 10 years. there are quite a few, articles written on the topic of vegan versus plant-based. The one that I really liked was actually an article written by Washington Post. The article is called "How Plant-Based Rebranded Vegan Eating for the Mainstream." And that article touches on a couple things, but it really says that consumers really get that there is a subtle but very powerful difference between how the word vegan versus plant-based come across. So when you think about the word vegan, it always evoked a sense that this was a member club. You are either in or you are out. And if you are in, you have to be all the way in. Whereas the word plant-based just kind of evoked a feeling that this is something that everybody can be part of. You don't have to identify as somebody, you can be part of the plant-based movement. So it had a much broader appeal and it felt more welcoming. The second nuance is that when it comes to vegan, there was always this sense that it was very hardcore, that it, again, you are in or out and it is a strict rule. Whereas with plant-based, people always felt that it was more of a gentle nudge towards eating more plant-based or, vegetable vegan meals. And finally, whenever people thought about veganism, the focus always on the foods that are forbidden. Whereas with plant-based, people saw it as these are foods that people can add to their diet. So it was more attractive. I remember when the word plant-based first started kind of breaking into mainstream, I didn't like it. I thought it sounded awkward, it sounded clunky, and it just kind of didn't roll off the tongue. However, then, over the last 5 years, just watching how this terminology made a huge difference and brought consumers and supporters to this movement who resisted the same idea just because it was worded vegan before. I just said, you know what, why don't we have it both ways? Those two words can still coexist, and we can just basically use one or the other based on who we're talking about and based on what we're trying to accomplish. So we're just kind of making a joke a couple of years ago, oh, the word plant-based or the term plant-based is becoming so popular. Are we ever going to rename our group instead of vegan leaders to plant-based leaders? And we said no. For our purposes, vegan leaders is something that it's fine that it has this connotation. But in our messaging, when we are kind of talking about what we are trying to do, let's also make sure to utilize plant-based. So I hope that makes sense. Now, I want to talk about one more aspect of our present time, and that is, was this current year actually good or bad for the vegan or plant-based movement with COVID and with people being forced to be at home, no conferences, no travel, and also just changing priorities. So was this ultimately good or bad? It's a mixed bag, but generally there is a feeling that the pandemic was actually fantastic for the plant-based movement because the pandemic shed a light on the meat industry, which wasn't favorable, and there was shortage of animal-based products, and as such, consumers just had to turn to plant-based food. This was also a time, I think, where a lot of people started just out of boredom or just just to kind of break the monotony of being at home. People started experimenting. People had more time to cook, so this was time for them to really give the plant-based foods a new chance. So generally speaking, I think if you look at all of the articles talking about COVID, it's seen as a good thing. However, I do want to also put some perspective on the fact that even with the huge pickup that we have seen, plant-based or vegan food is still a tiny, tiny fraction out there. So for example, if we look at the size of the US meat retail market, let's say it's almost 100 billion right now, whereas the market for the plant-based meat alternatives is almost just 1% of it. So even though it does seem like there's just so much attention and so much spotlight, and definitely statistics about the growth of the plant-based movement suggest it's growing very fast. Let's just keep in mind that we still have a long way to go, and it is still a small minority, small share of the market. And what we probably need to focus on achieving in the next 10 years is getting this square to grow. So with that, I think this was kind of a good first part that just explained how we got here and where we are today. Let's now turn it back to you guys and ask you, if you were to make one prediction for what's going to happen in the vegan movement overall in the next 10 years, what is that prediction? And, or, what do you think could happen in the next 10 years that would either speed up or slow down the progress? So with that, I'm going to turn off screen sharing and turn it back to the audience. You guys can talk about what do you think is going to happen in the next 10 years in the vegan movement broadly, or when it comes to the vegan movement specifically in our corporate lane. So let us, Michael Coleman is smiling. I think, Michael, let's put you on the spot and see what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So to me, I think one of the big changes in the industry, one of the reasons veganism has grown is because of our communication technology. We're more connected, and people are hearing the message and understanding. There's greater access to information. If you talked 40 years ago about what goes in a meat manufacturing plant, people wouldn't know. They wouldn't have any idea. But that information is out there now. So I think that's that access to information through technology is really helping us kind of communicate what it is to be vegan, what it is to be plant-based, why, the value. And I think there's a lot more science behind nutrition that you didn't really see in the past. You talked about spokespeople and about celebrities, and I think it's interesting. One of the ads that I see on TV a lot now is for Tony Gonzalez promoting nuts, saying this is where I get my protein. He's one of the greatest NFL players of all time, and he's not saying I'm vegan, but he's saying, it's just, this is what I eat, this is my product. I think it's becoming more normal. I think that's going to help us a lot.
Great. So for the next 10 years, do you just see this trend pretty much continue?
I do. And it's kind of surprised with the screen share at having only 1% of the market, because I don't know what vegans eat a lot less, because I feel like in the US anyway, numbers I see is typically somewhere between 3 and I think 8% vegan. Nobody knows for sure, but I guess maybe vegans don't eat it as much. But it's still low. It's still small. There's tremendous opportunity to grow, and with growth comes financial opportunity, and I think people are looking for financial opportunities and how to grow their money and what to invest in. So I think investment-wise, I think it's becoming a good option. So yeah, I see a lot of growth over the next 10 years.
Excellent. How about Daniel? Do you have any thoughts you would like to share about what do you think is going to happen in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the bifurcation in the market between like cell-based meat and then, traditional sort of vegan meat based on, plants. And I feel like as somebody who's been a vegan for a long time, I just couldn't stomach the idea of cell-based meat. Like, I understand why it would be beneficial to the movement, but I think there probably will be a bifurcation of of some people more interested in the cell-based meat because, you know, maybe it tastes more like what they're used to, but maybe somebody who's been vegan for a long time would be more interested in sort of, you know, a Beyond Meat sort of thing where it's just made out of plants.
Absolutely. That's that trend is out there, talked about a lot. Great. How about Gail? Do you have any predictions for the next 10 years?
Yeah, sure. Whoa. Well, one of the things that really came out of that article that Anastasia sent, but what I see, in addition to what's been said, is just that retailers are making more space for these products. So I don't have to hunt down, I don't have to go to someplace special, I don't have to go to the desk and ask that they carry something, because they're already carrying, if it's a variety of yogurts or a variety of cheeses or mock meats or pumfu instead of tofu. I mean, it's there. So to me, that's super exciting because it makes it easy for me, which means it makes it easy for someone who's veg curious to try something. And in terms of the second question, to me, I don't see anything slowing this down or hindering this. To me, I think it could really just make these companies, provided they've got good quality and can keep up with demand, I think it could just take off like a rocket.
Excellent. How about you, Mark? Anything you would like to share with us?
Yeah, hi, Darina. Thank you for organizing this. It's super interesting to exchange thoughts. I'm definitely very positive about this all as well going forward. I have very high hopes that we'll carry on a very positive, I was going to say trend, but for me it's not a trend and it should not be considered a trend. This is a movement that's here to stay. I think it's so important from at all levels, really. What I noticed as having been myself on a plant-based diet since many years now, vegetarian since 20, and I'd say vegan since about 7 now. You know, generally when people start on this journey, we have 3 main triggers that are quite recurring. It's either health, morals, as in morals/ethics, and then environment. And we all have our, I say, the battles that are the ones we feel the closest to. In my case, it's always been morals before anything else. I mean, it's great if I contribute favorably to environment and health at the same time, but for me, it was really morals. And we know how slowly morals evolve in our society. You know, people can question you about these things, and they feel, I mean, deep down that what you're saying to them makes sense, but are they really going to change their ways overnight? You know, probably not, because we know how culturally embedded things are for when it comes to food habits and all that. So I think that if we perhaps focus, because you know the sad reality is that we're all human beings are quite individualistic, and I think that even though it's not my main focus, I think health is something that we should really put forward more in terms of the benefits of a plant-based diet as opposed to the traditional one, because I think it's still seen as something quite niche, and perhaps people, although we have all the scientific backing behind this, you know, it's not widespread enough. And I think the layman is completely anchored in the traditional food pyramid of, you know, dates back to 30, 40, 50 years that is completely obsolete, really. So I think that should really be an area that we should sort of tap into and really spread the word at that level, because I think that when it comes to people's health, they'll be more attentive to environment and morals.
Excellent. Well said, Mark. Well, thank you. This was a good discussion. One thing that we are seeing happening that will probably boost the vegan movement hugely is big players, big companies, big investment firms are now pouring serious money into the plant-based food. We finally achieved that interest. It is very hard to be building a movement when the kind of the funding and the supply is only coming from small players. But now you almost can't pass a week without hearing about another huge mainstream company or investment fund, you know, opening a facility to produce plant-based products all over the world, or mainstream company very specifically, you know, creating a plant-based item. It was unheard of 5 years ago that the mainstream fast food chains would get into the plant-based business, and now it's almost an anomaly for these companies to not have a plant-based option, or at least a plan to roll out something major. So that's probably going to be something that's going to give the vegan movement real legs, even though it's coming kind of from the other side. So here are, for example, some tidbits of what people are predicting for the next 10 or so years. Definitely the theme, as you all have been saying, is this trend will continue and it will probably pick up steam even more. There's this bold prediction, for example, that by basically in the next 20 years, the vegan or plant-based eating will be so mainstream that it will basically be the lifestyle of 60% of the global population. And eating meat will become the anomaly or the minority opinion. There's also a lot of, you know, economists and experts who are crunching numbers who are trying to predict the growth of the plant-based alternative, or, you know, of course, the cell-based meat and some of those other adjacent products. And there are a lot of, you know, pretty realistic predictions out there that say, you know, we're going to start making a dent. That little red square or that little green square in that sea of, you know, the meat industry, animal products industry is going to grow. And, you know, just like with everything else, when you reach that magical tipping point on that magical critical mass, then everybody wants to be part of it. And you just basically can just sit back and let it happen. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but a lot of people who are looking at the components of the, you know, vegan food industry, they definitely noticed that it was really the plant-based milk that enjoyed the biggest success, more so than the meat alternatives, and more so than the kind of the natural, healthy, you know, whole foods plant-based items. So what is it that made the plant-based milk so successful? It's kind of hard to pinpoint, but it's very clear that that particular segment of the vegan market just hit all the right hot buttons and got to the point where it's growing not only faster than the cow's milk, for example, but actually the consumption of cow's milk is actively declining. And, you know, once you reach that kind of growth and that kind of market presence, it basically just promotes itself. And even people who were originally skeptical, they see these products in front of them all the time talked about, and you don't even have to work so hard for the growth to continue. So now let's switch gears and talk about vegan leaders and corporate management. I am the person who originally founded this group 6 years ago, and the idea was always, let's not just do a little bit of everything. Let's not just help the movement in all kinds of little ways. Let's carve out a lane that is going to be very specific, one that is completely untapped, and let's really go deep. The lane that we chose was the vegan movement in the corporate and Fortune 500 world. You know, many of you, I assume, either work in large corporations, or you have worked there, or you know that world. And I just always felt like the vegan movement was tapping into a lot of demographics and a lot of areas, but nobody really was looking at the opportunity of going after those large corporations. And you know, because many of us had day jobs in those corporations, it really made sense for us to make this our mission. So a couple of years ago, we actually articulated our mission as focusing on achieving plant-based victories, plant-based programs in corporate workplaces. And by doing that, we would also help the companies understand how the vegan or plant-based movement is just an extension of what these progressive companies are already doing with their corporate social responsibility. We were all very clear about what we wanted to do and where we wanted to play, but we also wanted to be clear about how we would primarily achieve that. A kind of original assumption of the vegan leaders in corporate management was, let's just go out there and find all the vegans out there who are working in the technology firms, who are working in the legal firms, who are working in professional services. Let's bring them together, let's unite them, let's give them some mechanism to find each other, and then come together and make things happen in their own companies. So our members was always a huge part of our equation. We always needed to have a mechanism to identify the members and know where they work, where they live, so we could bring them together. So that was really kind of our platform. Let's have either a group or an organization where we can have these members interact with each other and interact with us. And finally, because we really focus on uniting vegans who work in corporate companies, that allowed us compile a lot of know-how and intelligence about what's happening in those companies. There is very little information publicly available about what companies like IBM or Pfizer or Unilever are doing when it comes to vegan movement. These companies are not really publicizing this information. So because we are made of members who work at these companies, we actually have access to the information about what's happening in these companies and how they are responding to the movement in general. What are some of the strong points? What are some of the weak points? So now let me walk you through our own brief history, which is now basically 6 years. We were started in late 2014 as a LinkedIn group. LinkedIn group gave us that original platform to allow members to join us and allow us to start compiling information about where vegans in the corporate world work and live. Our very first website and logo, as you can see here, were definitely early efforts, but that's something that we focused on in that first year. It didn't take us that long to reach our first 1,000 members, and then we decided to rebrand from just vegan leaders to vegan leaders in corporate management, so the brand would also make it very clear where we focus. In 2017, we put up what's currently our website, and we also ran a contest with the designers to create our new logo. Some of these things may feel like they are just very superficial, or there are these things that are done on a periphery, and what is really the program that we would put out. But you almost cannot do much unless you create things that make up your identity. So this definitely were some big milestones in our earlier history. Then in 2018, we put out our first product, which was a Vegan Leaders Playbook. It was a free online guide that summarized all the know-how about how anybody who is a vegan working in a Fortune 500 or other corporation can just go out there and basically be the person who starts the vegan movement in a company. So that was our huge first offering. It's still out there and it still generates interest today. That was also a time where we created more structure around social media presence, and we created our first CRM and our first email distribution list. Then what happened? This was still at a time where Vegan Leaders was still an initiative that wasn't as well known, but Katrina Fox actually wrote an article about us in mid 2018, and that led to a record day, a record month, a record quarter for our members. We got so many new members during that time, and it was funny, it was done at the same time where LinkedIn changed the functionality around LinkedIn groups, which made it very hard for us to during that time to actually record information about our new members in our database. So it was an interesting time, but that was, if we kind of looked at our joiner trend over time, that quarter was just a huge spike, which we honestly, have not yet repeated. So definitely that told us that media coverage is huge. That was the same time where we got to 3,000 members. And we started this program called Vegan Leaders Corporate Initiatives Support Program to help coach people through a process of starting an initiative at their company. The idea was, yes, we can give people a handbook that tells them the steps that they have to follow, but usually people need a coach, just like they need, a personal trainer in order to get in a habit of exercises, or just how they might need a professional mentor to achieve their professional goals. That's why we kind of created this mentoring or coaching program to allow people participate and work kind of under a guidance, under a structure to achieve something tangible at their company. And now we are really getting into the last 2 years. In 2019, one of the biggest things we did, we decided to actually become a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And with that, came all of the other obligations, like we actually had to have a formal structure, board of directors. We did achieve the 501c3 status about a little over a year ago. And that was the time where we really sat down and say, what is our mission statement? What is our vision? What is the specific areas we're going to focus on in our future? About a year ago, we decided to also start offering more digital content. So that's where we, for example, started our live guest series, where we would, pick a topic from our niche and put together a video or put together more of a digital content. And if we look at this last year, this last year was definitely challenging, but what we achieved is we now have a YouTube channel with some of this digital content. We now surpassed 5,000 members on LinkedIn, and we had our first fundraiser actually just a month ago. So I hope it makes sense how we spent our last 6 years and how we slowly kind of refined what we want to focus on and kind of created the infrastructure around it. So now let me just share with you some numbers that represent our footprint and, more importantly, our potential for the future. This is actually about 6 months old. We are going to soon refresh these numbers and actually, recalculate how many members we have who work at these companies. I would also want to tell you that this does not at all represent the true number of vegans at these companies. In addition to these numbers, which are our actual members that we identified, we know that there are other people out there who are vegan at these companies. And we continuously are, of course, doing outreach to find additional vegans, bring them into our network, and allow all of these vegans who are working at the same company to collaborate and make something happen. So these are just basically count of our members by corporation. If we also look at our members in terms of what job function they are in, it's really interesting to see that a lot of vegans hold high-level leadership roles at companies. Leadership, it means basically anything between senior director, a partner, general manager, up to the C-suite of corporations. And this next level down, this is basically the next level management. We also have a lot of vegans who have their own business. That's not quite our focus. We, for example, do not really concentrate on the vegan businesses, but as sort of vegan professionals travel between corporate careers and entrepreneurial paths, we do have a good number of members who eventually started their own business. And as you can see here, we also have vegans who are working in basically all corporate functions. Geographically, this is kind of another interesting chart. It doesn't cover all our geographies, but it does tell you that our concentration is definitely in US, Canada. We do have pretty decent representation in Southern America, Australia, Europe. This is, these countries, you can't really see the numbers by country, but the Western Europe particularly, is where we have a lot of presence. So now with this, let me share with you what we really want to focus on next year and kind of from there over the next 5 or 10 years. Based on the discussion with our team, next year we want to overhaul our website. Our website, as you saw on our history chart, has served us quite well, but it is now not really meeting our needs. We have really kind of, our content has really outgrown that original structure of our website. So we want to actually really freshen up our website and make it much more digital and visual content friendly. That's going to be, you know, pretty big project, and we know based on history that it's going to be really important because that's how a lot of people actually reach us. We also discussed as a team and said, you know, let's do more with our support program. We are running this corporate initiative support program once a year and always help a small kind of number of participants achieve a tangible initiative at their company. But this is really a cornerstone of what we do. And if we can kind of grow it, expand around it, accommodate more participants, give people better tool, better technology, maybe even something like online courses where people on a much larger scale can learn the know-how of starting vegan programs at their company. This is what we definitely feel as a team needs to be our focus. And the third piece of the puzzle is, and one that we've been talking about for several years, is we need to achieve a better process around our member information. Right now, we do have a mechanism to know which of our members work at what companies, in what industries, in what job functions, but it's a fundamentally manual process that is very vulnerable to the information getting outdated. So for a while now, we have been talking about automating that process, or, you know, purchasing some product, some tool that would make that process a lot easier, possibly even moving off of LinkedIn, giving members some functionality, how they can look up each other more easily. And definitely one of our biggest limitations that we need to solve for is, you know, we are still a 100% volunteer-run group that is mostly funded by contributions of our core team. So next year we do want to focus more on raising some funds and, you know, move off the volunteer model to the point where we have hired resources, at least around the most important functions. We have two members of our internal team on the call, Michael or Gail. Would you like to add anything or provide any color around our 2021 priorities?
So I had one thought, one question actually. I don't know, put you on the spot, but you gave a lot of great information about what we've accomplished. But do you have numbers or any kind of graphic for? That was kind of like while you were talking, trying to pull this together. But the growth of the vegan leaders as far as membership.
The growth of our members has been actually pretty steady, except that one record day, you know, after the Katrina Fox article.
Right.
Our growth has been pretty steady at 2 to 3 new joiners every day. So that translates to about 1,000 new joiners every year, roughly speaking. You know, we definitely do see a little bit of a pickup based on if we put some effort into LinkedIn searches and, you know, manual outreach to additional vegans, or if we produce some success story. But we haven't really seen these kind of member statistics change much. And it's been steady even during the pandemic. Now we are seeing a little bit of a change in the mix of the members. And, you know, one that is probably just unique this year, whenever new members join us, we do look at their LinkedIn profile to see where those members work. And, you know, from that, then we have these statistics. So we definitely saw that during 2020, a larger share of our members are entrepreneurs, or, you know, people who are self-proprietors rather than working at large corporations. And that trend has been, you know, noticeable. So we just want to see kind of what it looks like after we hopefully get back to normal next year, because, you know, we do want our focus to stay faithful to vegans who work in large corporations. And, you know, to be honest,
Right.
Michael, we were never really fixated on making those numbers big. We would rather
Right.
keep up and, you know, make sure that as we add more members, we also add our offerings and we have the infrastructure that can support them.
Absolutely.
Great question. Any other question or comment?
Dorina, I think I would love to ask that question to the people who are on the call today, because I agree with you from where we sit. Those are certainly things that we want to improve, we want to take advantage of, we want to highlight our successes, certainly through the support program, and continue pushing that forward. But I'd love to hear if the others feel like there's something else that they're looking for that we haven't touched on. We would be very interested in that.
Great. Well, maybe for you guys on the call, this was your first introduction to what Vegan Leaders really focuses on. So maybe you would need time to kind of digest it before you could answer what kind of offering would be meaningful to you. But do you have any instant reaction?
I have a question.
Hi, Lena.
My name is Lena Evergreen, and I'm a business owner and former Washington, D.C. lobbyist. And I have been getting a lot of private messages via LinkedIn saying, I saw you on a vegan group, I'd like to connect. And aside from joining your group, I don't really remember joining any other particular vegan leader group. And I'm wondering, is this a result of my involvement with your group, which, by the way, I don't really know how I even got connected. I can kind of guess based on some of the other members how it might have happened. But I'm just curious, is that something that is already happening, or is that something you have a goal for in the future where other group members can reach out to each other and connect that way via, in this case, LinkedIn private messages?
Oh, wow, that's so fascinating. Thank you, Lena, for raising it. To be honest, that's really kind of a big unresolved question mark. We have seen both sides of it. We do want our group to allow people connect with colleagues for the purpose of a specific initiative, of course. But we actually have, if anything, seen that it's hard. If we, for example, have somebody who works at Deloitte in our group, they don't have an easy way to say who in this group of 5,000 people also works at Deloitte that I can connect with and talk about maybe putting something together at our company. What we are seeing is sort of what we don't want, which is, you know, people joining our group for the purposes of fundraising for their own, you know, venture or, you know, finding partners. And that's definitely kind of a delicate thing we're trying to manage. So I would say there is a minority of people out there who are very active on LinkedIn, who are, you know, pursuing contacts for their own purpose. And, you know, those people probably join our group and then they actually go through the member directory and reach out to people. You know, we would love to know, of course, if you feel like you're getting these unwanted messages. They're probably coming from a couple offenders, and we would like to take steps to, you know, eliminate them from our group. It's probably not something that is kind of happening or intended to happen on a large scale. Did this answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't feel offended in any way. And usually my response is, hey, I only connect with individuals I've worked with directly or indirectly. How do you know me? And when they say the vegan group, I was like, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. We're both vegan. But I usually don't accept their invitation on that regard unless they have something really specific that they want to connect on.
Got it. To be honest, my personal philosophy is if somebody wants to connect with me, which does happen a lot because of the common vegan interest, I accept their invitation. But then, you know, if basically the next thing is, I want to talk about this initiative, or can I sell you my product, then I unfriend them. And, you know, it doesn't always happen. There are some people who genuinely just want to grow their personal vegan network. And, you know, I personally am always very passionate and very excited to connect with vegans who live in like Serbia or
Yeah.
Uruguay, you know, probably where they do not actually know a lot of other vegan professionals. And those are the people who are genuinely just trying to feel like a little more empowered in what they do. But you're right.
Sure. If you knew of a way to categorize individuals, like I wish there was a way for, if I were to accept an invite, that I could keep them in a category of vegans so that, you know, I've had colleagues reach out to me and say, hey, I see you've connected with Mr. or Miss XYZ. How do you know them? And that's my biggest fear, is I don't want to be like, oh, I just randomly accepted them because they also eat plants. Like, that's not a reason for me to connect with someone. Especially when someone wants a referral, like, hey, I'm interested in possibly working with this person. What can you tell me? I see we have them in common. I want to be able to give a response that, oh, in 2017, we worked together on this project.
Right. Well, you know, I think it speaks volumes about your LinkedIn profile being very strong if people are, you know, specifically finding you in our very large group and like specifically reaching out to you. So your headline and your profile must really stand out in a good way. And you know, it's almost like a good problem to be so
Right,
popular that people are reaching out to you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Great. But you know, strategically, Lena, you know, this is something that we definitely ask ourselves all the time, and we want to do better. We want to make it easier for our members to find others for the right purpose. But then, you know, we of course have to manage the other side, which is to prevent kind of unwanted solicitation and, you know, kind of outreach that goes beyond the, you know, just connections.
Luckily, I can assure you I am not annoyed or offended in any way. I very much appreciate being involved, and most requests are received with happiness and gratitude.
That's good to hear. All right, so let us look at a couple more pieces of information here. This is also just some stuff I got from this really neat, actually not even vegan specific website. It's healthcareers.co, where this individual put together a lot of really cool infographics with, you know, cited sources, you know, pretty good kind of quality stuff. And, you know, I always take this information more as just like another data point. I don't get kind of hung up on them, but it is interesting to see, and it does provide some additional perspective of maybe where we want to focus our efforts. So interestingly, the 5 countries that seem to have the highest percentage of vegans or kind of self-identified vegans are India, Israel, Taiwan, Italy, and Austria. You know, India, no surprise, I guess. Israel is also a country that made huge splash in the last couple of years with kind of how their vegan movement took off in a way that was unheard of globally. These last 3 countries surprised me. This is not what I would necessarily expect to be the right kind of markets that are closer to that critical mass. And I actually kind of try to compare these statistics to the representation the vegan leaders in corporate management has in those countries. And I can tell you, we definitely do not have kind of high percentage of members in these 3 countries. So, you know, I don't know what's next. You know, I don't know if we have, you know, 7 other countries that are just below this number, but, you know, stuff like this is useful occasionally, because it does maybe point you to opportunities or point you to places where the environment could be such that initiatives should be easier. And as you guys can imagine, with our movement as well as any other movement that is still just on the cusp of that tipping point, it really does help to create growth and momentum where you can get it. So if, for example, you know, we are really focusing on vegan initiatives in corporations, and let's say we really would love to see something big happen at IBM. It's a company that is so innovative. It's a company where we have the largest number of members. It's a company, you know, that is in the industry where the vegan or plant-based initiatives seem much easier to achieve. So, you know, let's say we really are fixated on making something happen at IBM. But, you know, sometimes just luck is not there. And even though everything on the paper points to something, you just always have to be nimble and say, it doesn't seem like the things are really aligned at IBM, but we have this other company, you know, where we only have 2 vegans, and it's say pharmacy, you know, one that is not really easily aligned with the vegan movement, but it seems like something is happening at that company that's 1 or 2 people are really, you know, working on something that could be big, it's really important for us to shift our focus and support basically wherever we feel we can generate successes, and not be, so married to something that we, miss out on something else. So one of the things that was interesting in these infographics is, for example, if you look at the US vegans by age, how does this compare to the typical workers in the corporate world? What was quite interesting is it seems like in this age bracket, there are, say, 4 times as many vegans, relatively speaking, than in the next age bracket. What can explain this? Is this just a fluke? Is this just, something that is fundamentally random? Or do we have some kind of, generational or structural situation there? Our members, if we think of kind of typical corporate employees, probably would be across all of these age groups, but with pretty heavy representation here. So what does this tell us? Does this kind of line up with our members? And, is there something we can do to, help close some of these gaps and generate more vegans in this very important, very productive, very influential age bracket? Finally, one thing that also jumps out at us from this slide is, and this is something you may have already heard, is the huge explosive new demand for the plant-based products is not necessarily coming from vegans. The number of self-identified vegans in the US and Western Europe or globally has not really grown that much, but the demand and interest in the plant-based products has been explosive. That's because that demand is really coming from the flexitarians, from the people who do not want to identify as vegans or vegetarians, but they want to eat more plant-based or vegan foods. So what does that tell us? How does that drive our potential strategy? It's kind of hard to tell because, whenever you are deciding on a strategy for your organization, you want to kind of walk that fine line between being nimble and being open to opportunities, but at the same time, staying in your lanes. So we do want our group to be about vegans, for example. We do want to continue focusing on identifying the vegan influencers in the corporate world and not really dilute our mission to the point where it's, focused on flexitarians too heavily. But, where is kind of that sweet spot where we still call our group vegan leaders, but allow those vegan leaders create initiatives that appeal to their flexitarian colleagues. So I realize we are actually at the end of our time, so we are probably going to skip this next activity. This is an activity that our management team and our board is going to conduct again. It's one that we try to do every couple of years, is to just basically reassess what is happening outside our organization, what is happening in the movement, in the overall market, and what are some of the, recently updated internal strengths and weaknesses. This, this is just a standard kind of managerial activity you want to do to, kind of analyze where you should focus on based on more than just a gut feel. So I was hoping to potentially do this exercise really quickly and ask you for some thoughts, but you know what, it's the end of our call, so maybe we'll just do it at some later point. So what I would like to finish with is, this is the last livecast of this year. We had them basically every month on various topics, and all of those are recorded and available in our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and search for Vegan Leaders in Corporate Management, you will see a list of 11 videos, and they are pretty much just recordings of our other livecasts. The ones that I would want to highlight is, there's, for example, one talking about different tactics of finding additional vegans at your company. I believe that we focused on something like 7 creative ways of finding other vegans where you work. Or there's, for example, one about influencing the healthcare industry, both as a potential employee of the healthcare or as just a general constituent. So please take a look. These are less than an hour long, and usually they have some visuals and some discussions with them. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Any final thoughts or questions?
Thanks,
Okay.
Serena.
Thank you.
Quick question and just thank you. This was a great presentation. And I'm glad you're recording them because I missed the very beginning. But I noticed that you said that you focus on corporate American individuals who don't necessarily work for themselves or work in their own businesses. But I'm curious if you've done outreach in the past to executive coaches and firms that focus on being executive leaders in the corporate sphere. So individuals that may own their own business, but they have the potential to influence. Like I have a friend who is a executive coach and works with IBM, and she's vegan. So she might not work for IBM per se, but they look to her for leadership.
Absolutely. You know, it's not a group that we, you know, created a specific strategy around, but we, I think, did recognize these kind of powerful outside consultants or individuals who have major influence over corporations. The executive coaches is definitely a demographic we are seeing in our group quite a bit. And, you know, several individuals have been on our board who have been executive coaches or been very involved with us. So, you know, it's a group that strategically has been on our radar. However, we, you know, haven't really, I guess, done anything specific other than very much welcoming those individuals and, you know, asking what kind of support or what kind of information we can provide to them so they can continue influencing corporate decision makers. And also, you know, of course, if somebody is an executive coach, we would love to talk to them about potentially being involved with our corporate support, corporate initiative support program, and help maybe very high profile vegans who work at corporations who want to really start a movement or put something together, but their, you know, position is maybe delicate, so they could benefit from top-notch high-level coach. To give an example, Lena, last year we had somebody working at Adobe at a very, very high-level executive role who was vegan, and she wanted to put together some kind of vegan program at Adobe, but she always felt very awkward about it because she felt that being in a position of power, it could be perceived as her bringing kind of personal agenda and mixing it with her job. So it was a situation that had a huge opportunity, but this person kind of wasn't really convinced she had the right strategy. And I think, you know, eventually she decided that it wasn't the right time for her at the time to push for a big vegan initiative. But, you know, maybe if she had a powerful executive coach who could navigate her better through that, maybe she might have achieved something. So does that answer your question?
Very much so. Thank you so much.
Certainly. All right, well, we are 4 minutes past our time. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. We usually get a lot more, you know, views on these live casts after the fact, but, you know, big thank you, Gail, Michael, Daniel, Mark, and Lena for joining us live and contributing your questions and comments.
Thanks, Dorina.
Thank you very much, Darina. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.